Childhood is supposed to be innocent, filled with laughter, toys, and bedtime stories. But what if those memories you hold so dearly hide something darker? What if the shadows in your room weren't just your imagination, but something watching, waiting, and whispering your name? Tonight, I'll take you back into the terrifying world of childhood fears. Except these three stories aren't just nightmares. They're real, disturbing childhood memories that will haunt you long after the lights go out. The house carried an unsettling weight from the very beginning, as though time itself had gathered in its walls and left behind a residue of silence that was too thick to ignore. When the family moved in, excitement filled the air for everyone but the child, who immediately felt something different pressing down on them. The atmosphere wasn't welcoming, it clung to their skin, heavy and suffocating, as though the building had been waiting for someone small and vulnerable to occupy its rooms. The parents smiled at the creaking floors and the wide windows, but the child could only sense a tension in the air, a watchfulness that lingered in every corner. At night the house changed. Shadows stretched in strange ways, turning corners into pits of darkness that seemed deeper than they should be, and the long hallways became distorted paths that felt endless when crossed. But it was the bedroom assigned to the child that carried the greatest unease. It was an ordinary room at first glance, with faded wallpaper and a narrow window overlooking the yard, but the closet built into the wall drew the eye immediately. Its wooden door, chipped and slightly off its hinges, gave the impression that it hadn't been opened in years. Standing in front of it for the first time, the child felt a chill spread through their chest, a quiet instinct whispering that this was not a place meant to be disturbed. During the daytime, the closet appeared harmless, blending into the background while sunlight filled the room. Yet as soon as darkness fell, the closet seemed to change shape. The child could not look away from the seam where the door met the frame, the crooked line that appeared to widen ever so slightly in the dim glow of the night. Lying in bed with the blanket pulled up tight, they watched, waiting for the slightest movement, convinced that something inside was staring back through the gap. The first night brought with it a sound that froze them in place. It was faint at first, like the hush of someone speaking under their breath, a whisper that did not belong to the house or the wind outside. They pressed the blanket against their mouth, their eyes wide and unblinking, listening as the sound carried on, too intentional to dismiss. In the morning, when the words tumbled out shakily to their parents, it was met with laughter and reassurance that it was only the strangeness of being in a new home. But the whispers returned again the following night, clearer this time, layered like overlapping voices, and the child began to understand that the closet was never empty at all. The second night in the new house felt heavier than the first, the silence pressing in with a weight that seemed unnatural. The child tried to convince themselves that the whispering they had heard before was only the result of nerves and imagination, but as the lights dimmed and the house settled into sleep, dread coiled in their stomach. The closet loomed at the edge of the room, its crooked frame catching the glow of the small lamp on the bedside table. They pulled the blanket higher, determined not to stare, yet their eyes kept drifting back, waiting for something to happen. At first there was nothing, just the faint hum of the house, the distant creak of pipes, and the muffled sound of wind brushing against the window. But then, faintly, the whispering began again. It was softer than the first night, so quiet the child thought they might be imagining it, but it grew steadily clearer, words layered on top of each other, until it sounded like more than one voice. They strained to listen, unable to catch full sentences, only fragments, low tones mixing with higher ones, weaving together into a sound that made their skin crawl. The child squeezed their eyes shut and pressed their hands over their ears, but the voices seemed to slip past the effort, echoing inside their head instead of outside it. A faint scratching noise followed, like fingernails lightly grazing wood, and it came from the inside of the closet door. The scratching climbed upward, stopping just short of the latch, then dragged downward again, slow and deliberate. The lamp flickered once, casting the room into a brief pulse of shadow, and the child gasped, clutching the blanket tighter. Their breathing grew louder in their ears, but underneath it, the voices seemed to rise in pitch, as though delighted that their fear was growing. For a few moments, the child was certain they saw movement in the thin crack where the door met the frame, a subtle shifting of shadow that didn't belong to the room. Then came a sound that froze them entirely, a single word whispered with chilling clarity, different from the overlapping voices. It was a greeting, simple and terrifying, a sharp, "Hello," spoken in a tone that was neither kind nor threatening, but impossibly hollow. The scratching stopped, the whispers fell silent, and the crooked closet door stood waiting in the darkness, as if daring the child to come closer. The third night came with a sense of inevitability, as if the child already knew the house would not let them rest. The air in the bedroom felt colder than it should have been, the kind of cold that seeps into the skin rather than brushes against it. The closet loomed darker than the rest of the room, its crooked door outlined by a faint strip of moonlight that only seemed to emphasize its uneven frame. The child lay awake, staring at it, too afraid to close their eyes, too tense to look away. Every creak of the house sent shivers down their spine, but it was the quiet that was worse, the waiting silence that felt like it was watching them as much as they were watching the door. The whispers began again, but this time there was no slow build. They started suddenly, erupting in a tangled mess of voices that rose and fell as though arguing among themselves. Some sounded like they were right beside the bed, others seemed buried deep in the walls, but all of them centered around the closet. The child's chest tightened as the voices shifted, clearer now, speaking phrases that almost made sense. Among them, one stood out from the rest, sharp and deliberate, "We'll see you." The words were followed by a low, dragging sound, as though something heavy was sliding across the closet floor. The scratching returned too, more violent this time, nails or claws dragging upward with such force the child imagined the wood would soon give way. The lamp flickered erratically, bathing the room in short bursts of light that revealed flickering shapes pressing against the door, like shadows trying to push through. The child's throat burned with the effort of keeping silent, tears welling in their eyes as the whispers grew louder, forming a chorus that seemed to demand attention. The door gave a faint groan, hinges straining as though pulled from the other side. For a moment, it seemed to bow outward, a thin sliver of blackness visible along the seam. From that gap came the stench of damp earth and something sour, a smell so sharp it forced the child to cover their nose with trembling hands. The voices hushed all at once, replaced by a deep, rattling breath that seemed to exhale directly into the room. Then, against the wood, faint impressions appeared, shapes like fingers pressing from within, long and crooked, stretching the surface as though ready to break through. "You said explain chapter no 4 in 400 words without any headings and without any ending sentence," ChatGPT said. The fourth night pressed down with an unease that the child could not shake, even as they tried to cling to the comfort of their blankets. Sleep was impossible, every sound in the house felt magnified, every shadow seemed alive. The closet had become more than just part of the room. It was the room's center, the weight around which everything else revolved. The crooked door appeared darker than the rest of the wall, as if it absorbed the faint light instead of reflecting it, pulling all attention back to that narrow line between wood and frame. The child tried not to stare, but the sense of being watched left no choice. The voices began earlier this time, as though whatever hid inside no longer cared to wait for the night to grow late. They whispered in rapid succession, overlapping and twisting together, an unintelligible chorus that filled the room with their presence. The air grew colder until the child's breath came in short, misty clouds. Their teeth began to chatter, not just from the chill but from the terror building in their chest. Then came the scratching, harsher than before, a relentless scraping that clawed at the wood in jagged patterns. It didn't stop this time, it only grew louder, angrier, until it sounded as though something was carving into the door itself. The child clamped their hands over their ears, but it did no good. The sound seemed to bypass them, seeping into their head. The lamp flickered again, its glow faltering until the room was drenched in near darkness. With each flicker, the closet door seemed to shift, its edges blurring as if it wasn't quite solid anymore. From beneath the door, a thin stream of darkness bled outward across the floor. It wasn't a shadow, it moved like liquid smoke, curling and twisting as though alive, spreading toward the child's bed. The smell followed soon after, damp and rotten, the stench of something long hidden and decaying. The whispers stopped all at once, and in the silence a new sound emerged, slow, deliberate breathing that rattled like broken glass. The child's eyes locked on the door as a faint outline pressed against it, something like a face distorted by the wood. Its features were stretched, wrong, but unmistakably human in their intent, and in that frozen moment the child understood that what hid behind the door was no longer content to stay inside. The fifth night was the worst yet, the kind of night where the air itself felt poisoned with dread. The child could no longer convince themselves it was imagination. not when the closet door seemed to throb with an energy of its own, as though whatever was inside was stronger with each passing evening. They lay curled under the blankets, body stiff, heart racing with every creak of the floorboards and every groan of the walls, but nothing compared to the suffocating presence pressing from the corner of the room. The closet door appeared swollen in the shadows, the crooked frame looking ready to split apart. The first sound was not a whisper this time, but a low knock, 3 steady taps that echoed through the wood and into the child's bones. Then came the voices, layered and relentless, no longer faint or hesitant, but commanding. They said the child's name over and over, each voice sharper than the last, as though trying to draw them nearer. Between the words came laughter, thin and broken, the kind that made the hair rise on the back of their neck. The child pressed the pillow tight around their head, but the voices still slid through, echoing inside their skull. The scratching returned, violent and desperate, claws raking the wood in long, tearing strokes. The sound was unbearable, like metal dragged across stone, each shriek louder than the last. The door shuddered visibly, rattling against its hinges, as though something inside was slamming against it. From beneath the crack, a pale hand slid into view, fingers too long and bent at wrong angles, dragging itself across the floor with agonizing slowness before retreating back into the dark. The child could not move, muscles locked in terror, their breath trapped in their throat. The lamp flickered once and then died completely, plunging the room into shadow. The only light came from the faint glow of the moon, casting a silver stripe across the crooked door. The voices grew louder still, overlapping, shrieking their name in tones that were not entirely human. The door buckled inward with a groan, but it did not open, as though some fragile barrier was still holding it shut. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the room fell silent, the kind of silence that carried weight, leaving the child trembling, certain that the thing in the closet was waiting for the next night to finally step through. The 6th night arrived with a storm, rain lashing against the windows and thunder shaking the walls, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside the child's room. The air was so heavy it felt hard to breathe, every inhale sharp and cold, as if the night itself wanted to smother them. The parents thought the weather would lull their child to sleep, but the storm only made the shadows deeper, the corners darker, and the closet more alive. The crooked door rattled faintly with each gust of wind, but the child knew it wasn't the storm that made it move. The whispers began in rhythm with the rain, faint murmurs that pulsed like a chant. At first they were scattered, rising and falling with the thunder, but soon they merged into something deliberate, voices that spoke in unison, words the child couldn't understand yet felt inside their skull. The voices repeated the same fragments, cold syllables that grew sharper with each repetition, until they felt like commands. The closet door trembled in its frame, the handle twitching as though a hand gripped it from the other side. The child clutched the blanket to their chest, their knuckles white, eyes wide as they watched the wood quiver with every scrape from within. The scratching was no longer hesitant, but furious, claws tearing at the inside until the sound was nearly drowned out by thunder. Each strike left the impression that the door was weakening, that the barrier was thinning. Then came something worse, an oozing blackness seeping from beneath the crack, a thick liquid shadow that spread across the floorboards like spilled ink. It rippled unnaturally, forming shapes that twisted and dissolved before they could be recognized. The smell of damp earth and rot filled the room, a suffocating stench that made the child gag and bury their face into the blanket. Lightning flashed, and in the brief light the child saw the liquid rise into something more, a suggestion of a face forming out of its surface, with hollow eyes and a grotesque smile that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The voices grew louder, their chant turning into laughter that echoed off the walls until it was impossible to tell how many there were. The closet door groaned under invisible weight, bulging outward as the black liquid writhed at its base, creeping closer with every second, and the storm outside only seemed to give it strength. The 7th night brought no storm, no wind, no sound at all, just a silence so thick it pressed against the child's ears and made their own heartbeat feel like thunder in their chest. The stillness should have been comforting after the chaos of the night before, but instead it was worse, because the silence felt intentional, like everything in the house was holding its breath for what was about to happen. The child lay awake, exhausted and trembling, every muscle aching from nights without rest, but their eyes never strayed from the closet door. It seemed taller now, darker, as if it had grown with each night, feeding on their fear. The first sound was faint but unmistakable, a wet, heavy breathing that did not belong to anyone in the house. It dragged through the room in steady rhythm, a rasping inhale followed by a rattling exhale, and with each breath the closet door quivered slightly. The child clutched the blanket tighter, praying it would stop, but soon the voices joined in again, sharper and clearer than before. They no longer whispered nonsense. They spoke in broken sentences, calling the child's name, urging them to listen, coaxing them to open the door. Some voices were mocking, others strangely calm, but all of them carried the same intent. The door handle began to turn, squealing softly in the silence, though it never completed its motion. It jerked, stopped, twitched again, as though invisible fingers tested its strength. The child could barely breathe, their small frame shivering under the blanket as the sound of that slow twisting filled the room. Then came the shadows, sliding out from under the door like spilled smoke, curling across the floorboards, creeping closer to the bed. They rose in thin tendrils reaching like hands, and with them came a drop in temperature so sharp the child's breath fogged in the air. The voices quieted, and then another voice rose, different from the rest. It was softer, warm, and familiar. It was their mother's voice, gentle and coaxing, telling them it was safe, telling them to open the door. For one terrible moment, the child wanted to believe it. But even as the voice spoke, the closet door creaked, and a single unblinking eye appeared in the gap, pale and cold, staring directly at them without moving. The night began with a suffocating stillness, the kind that made every second stretch longer than it should. The house felt heavier, weighed down by something unseen. And the child could sense that the closet no longer needed to wait for the cover of night to show its intent. The door looked wrong in the dim light, slightly crooked, as if the wood itself had warped under pressure from the inside. The child lay frozen in bed, their body wrapped in blankets that no longer gave any warmth, staring at the uneven line where the door met the frame. The whispers started quietly, almost hidden within the silence, but soon multiplied until the room seemed full of voices. They weren't just calling anymore, they were demanding, urgent, and cruel. The sound made the child's stomach twist, and when the scratching returned, it wasn't gentle or scattered. It was violent, sharp rakes against the wood, followed by a thud, as if something massive dragged itself within the closet and slammed against the walls. The door shuddered, hinges groaning, and from beneath the gap a black shadow spread across the floor, thicker than before, pulsing like it had a heartbeat. The air stank of mold and rot, so strong it burned the child's throat. Each breath was shallow, ragged, as their eyes stayed locked on the shifting dark that was inching closer to the bed. The lamp flickered once, twice, then failed, plunging the room into murk lit only by faint moonlight. That was when the voice spoke again, not a whisper but a guttural command, deep and broken, telling the child to open the door. The words echoed like they came from everywhere at once, vibrating through the floor, the walls, even the bed. The child grabbed their flashlight with shaking hands, clicking it on. For a brief second, the beam cut through the darkness, halting the shadows in their advance. But as the light wavered, the blackness surged forward again, climbing the walls and curling around the ceiling. The beam caught the door, and there, pressed against the inside, was a pale face stretched wide in a grotesque grin, its mouth open too far, eyes blank and unblinking. The flashlight flickered, dimmed, and died, leaving the room in complete darkness as the closet door began to creak open. The ninth night felt inevitable, as though the child had been walking toward this moment, since the first whisper slipped out of the closet. The room was thick with dread before darkness even settled, and every sound in the house seemed to fade until only the rhythmic creak of the closet door filled their ears. It pulsed like a heartbeat, each groan of the hinges timed with the pounding in their chest. The air was colder than any night before, so frigid that the child's breath fogged instantly and clung to the blanket they held against their face. The voices came in waves, no longer disjointed or scattered but united, chanting in unison, their tone low and guttural. They repeated the child's name like a command, stretching it until it no longer sounded human. Each syllable shook the walls, and with every echo the closet door swelled outward, as though the thing inside was too large to be contained anymore. The scratching followed, relentless and furious, a chorus of claws tearing at the wood until splinters cracked and scattered onto the floor. The noise was unbearable, vibrating through the floorboards, through the child's bones, until it felt like their own body would split open. The shadows were different now, no longer creeping tendrils but heavy, thick waves of blackness that poured from under the door in steady streams. They crawled across the floor with purpose, rising like smoke and forming warped shapes that flickered at the edge of recognition. Sometimes they looked like hands, sometimes faces, always reaching, always hungry. The stench of decay and damp earth thickened the air, making the child choke and fight for each breath. The handle of the closet turned slowly, this time without hesitation. It clicked once, twice, as if testing whether it was free. The child gripped the flashlight, but their hands were too slick with sweat to hold it steady. When they finally managed to flick it on, the beam revealed the closet door bowing inward, a wide crack splitting down the center. Through it, an eye peered out, milky white and unblinking, and beside it, a grin too wide for a human face stretched impossibly across the dark. The light trembled in their grip as the eye blinked once, deliberate and slow before the door began to open wider. The 10th night came with no pretense of silence, no waiting, no whispers. From the moment darkness settled, the closet made itself known. The door rattled violently, the frame straining as if the house itself was resisting what wanted to emerge. The child sat upright in bed, no longer pretending to sleep, knowing there was no escape from what had been building night after night. The room shook with guttural laughter, deep and layered, dozens of voices twisting together until they became a roar. The air was sharp with the smell of rot, thick enough to sting the eyes, and the temperature plunged so low that frost began to creep across the window panes. The closet door cracked open with a shriek of splitting wood, and the shadows that had once trickled through now surged like a flood, filling every corner of the room. Out of them emerged twisted shapes, human, like but broken arms too long, faces stretched into grins that looked carved. They crawled across the walls and ceiling, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. At their center stood something larger, heavier, its presence pressing down on the child like a physical weight. The chanting stopped, leaving only silence, but it was a silence more terrifying than any sound. The child, trembling but desperate, clutched the flashlight one last time and flicked it on. The beam pierced the shadows, revealing the figure in full, a towering, skeletal thing with a face half-formed, as if it was borrowing pieces from every nightmare the child had ever dreamed. It moved forward, the closet door now nothing more than a shattered frame behind it, and the shadows closed in, smothering the air. The child screamed, the sound swallowed instantly, and then the light went out. When the parents came in the morning, the bedroom was empty. The bed was made, the window shut, the only sign of struggle being deep claw marks carved into the closet door, which now stood perfectly closed. The child was never seen again, and though the house was eventually sold, the new owners spoke of strange voices and cold air that lingered upstairs, especially at night. The closet remained untouched, always locked, though sometimes neighbors swore they heard faint scratching coming from the walls. Thank you so much for joining me through this terrifying journey. If you enjoyed these disturbing childhood memory horror stories, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling tales that will keep you awake at night. Your support means everything, and it's what keeps these dark stories alive. Stay safe, sleep with the lights on, and remember, sometimes the things we fear in childhood never really leave us.